Yo, what up, readers? It's your boy Porcupine TV, and I'm making my way through another book series here, the Harry Potter book series. The spines make a cool little art piece here of Harry Potter like riding on a dragon or something. I'm about halfway through this series, a little over half. And yeah, I want to give you guys some thoughts on the books. Harry Potter, it's one of the biggest, book franchises of all time. And I've never actually read it all the way through. I think I just read like the first book as a kid, but I've never actually read them all the way through. I'm a little above the age group that is intended for these books. I think that media for children, you should be able to enjoy it as an adult as well. It should be well written. Like the idea that we're just showing our kids just garbage nonsense just because they're kids. That's how you end up with a generation of retarded losers. So Harry Potter, let's get into it, by J.K. Rowling. So the first book in the series, we got Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Sorcerer's Stone as it was renamed in America, which I think was a very stupid renaming because Philosopher's Stone is an actual mythical item. That's an actual concept in alchemy, the Philosopher's Stone. A Sorcerer's Stone is not actually a thing in real life. It's not any sort of mythical item outside of the Harry Potter universe. I really didn't enjoy this book very much. The book opens and we follow Harry Potter as he's living with his family, the Dursleys. And I really enjoyed the parts with the Dursleys. They're really just the worst family ever. His brother, his stepbrother, Dudley, is like the quintessential spoiled brat character. And a lot of his kind of dialogue was pretty funny. She got it pretty spot on with how sort of a spoiled brat kid acts. And yeah, you really see how horrible Harry's life is. His parents have died when he was very young, and he's had to live his whole life with his aunt and uncle, the Dursleys, who are insufferable. They really treat him like trash. And I think the reason why they made Harry's life so horrible is to kind of fit with the themes of escapism in this book. Because Harry, you probably know, is a wizard. He gets to go to this wizarding school, which is super awesome and mystical and magical. This whole secret world, basically. And one of the main themes of the book is the escapism from, real life to this magical, awesome world. A lot of people may resonate with Harry, not having the best life at home. But reading this book, you can kind of imagine going to an alternate universe where everything is amazing. So yeah, I can definitely see where the appeal is for children in this book. Not so much adults. It is really written for children only. A lot of her prose is kind of sloppily written. There's a lot of parts where things aren't really worded exactly correctly, and it's kind of confusing what Rowling is trying to get across, or Rowling, I don't know how to pronounce it. One thing I didn't really like about this book is the wizarding world they've created doesn't really feel very real, which, I mean, maybe that's not what they were going for, but it feels so over-the-top cartoonish. A lot of the stuff in this wizarding world just doesn't really make any sense. Whereas in our world, we have, pictures that stand still. In the wizarding world, the pictures all move. And Harry gets a collector's item, this little card with Dumbledore on it, who's a famous wizard. And half the time, Dumbledore just leaves because he's a real living person in the picture. Things like that, they don't really make any sense. Like, they've basically just created trading cards, but worse, because the character is gone half the time. A lot of the things Rowling puts in here that we see in the wizarding world, it seems like she's just adding it in just because it's so different from our world. There's a lot of comedy of how different, the wizarding world is from ours. But it doesn't really feel realistic. It doesn't feel like she actually contemplated what a real wizarding world would look like. It just seems like she put a lot of throwaway jokes in here. One thing I really don't think was thought out very much is the sport of Quidditch in this book. The rules are just really over the top retarded. Pretty much all that matters is grabbing this item called the snitch, the golden snitch, which is a hard to catch item that gives you a bunch of points, and every game has to result in a snitch catch. Like, the game will not end until they catch the snitch. Games have gone on for like months, they mention in this book, and it just doesn't really make any sense. Like, the sport itself doesn't make much sense. The rules aren't balanced at all. It seems like something Rowling thought up in like 45 minutes. One thing I do like about this book and the rest of the franchise, I do like the main three characters, the main trio, Ron, Harry, and Hermione. I think the book does a good job of kind of fleshing out these three's relationship. They have a kind of very funny camaraderie going. There's a lot of funny dialogue in here between the characters. Hermione starts off as this, goody two-shoes snitch person, and she kind of grows over the course of this book and a few of the other books. She kind of grows to care about her friends more than the rules necessarily, whereas in the beginning of this book, she would absolutely throw anyone under the bus if they were breaking the rules. I think Hermione's a good character. Dumbledore's another great character in here. He's this very wise wizard who's the kind of principal of the school, headmaster of the school. He's essentially Gandalf, the old wise wizard. And a lot of his dialogue was pretty insightful, I think, especially for a kid's book. One thing I thought was cool in here is the villain Voldemort. They do a pretty good job of making you kind of fear him, even though he doesn't really appear much in the book. You get this backstory of who Voldemort was and how scared people are of him. People are so scared to even say his name. The word Voldemort is almost treated like the N-word is in our society, where people are just afraid to even utter it. Dumbledore has a good line in here. He says, fear of a name only increases fear of the thing itself. Thought that was a ingenious line. A lot of the book is kind of a mystery of figuring out what is going on around the school. There's this room that people aren't allowed to go in, and the main trio discover a three-headed dog guarding something, and a lot of various other suspect things happen, and they have to kind of piece together what's going on. I found a lot of the conclusions that the characters come to when trying to piece things together didn't really make sense, and didn't seem realistic to what a person would actually think in that scenario. They'll see something happen and be like, oh, well, because Snape was here at this time in this place, then therefore this, and this must be happening, and Snape is secretly trying to steal this item. And they come to these crazy conclusions based on the tiniest bit of information that don't really make any sense. It just seems like Rowling is making the characters come to whatever conclusion they need to for the plot to progress. It didn't really feel like they were actually solving this mystery. One of my biggest gripes with the books, this happens in all the books, is monologuing. This book and all the rest of the books that I'm going to review today all follow a very similar structure. Harry comes to school. There's some weird, mysterious stuff that's going on that they have to piece together. And then all of a sudden a villain reveals himself who you really couldn't have figured out that they were the villain with the information you were given. And then the villain proceeds to give a long monologue kind of explaining away all the plot holes of the book. It was very annoying. It's annoying for a few reasons. One, I feel like the villains that reveal themselves at the end, the books don't give you enough information that you could figure it out on your own. It's very much like thrown at you last minute. You couldn't have possibly known what was happening. And the monologues the characters give, they just make no sense why the character would ever be doing this. They almost always lose in the end because they were giving some long monologue. Almost every book, the villain could have won if they didn't feel the need to explain for 30 minutes every single thing to Harry, spell it out. It's just pretty lazy writing. You can tell the only reason they're giving this monologue is because the reader needs to be given a lot of information. But, from the character's perspective, it doesn't make any sense for them to be monologuing. Another thing I don't really like about these books as well, it's in this book and it's present in the rest of the books. It gets even worse in the rest of the books, is the Slytherin house is pretty, comedically evil. At Hogwarts, this magical school, there are these 4 houses: Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, that these children are all divided into. This magical item called the Sorting Hat basically sorts all these children into the right house. based on reading their mind. Each house represents some sort of character trait. Gryffindor is like boldness or something. I think Slytherin is ambition. They all represent some sort of trait. But literally everyone in the Slytherin house is comedically evil. Like, it is so absurd. The heroes and villains in the books, I mean, it's very black and white, who is a hero, who is a villain, which is fine if you want to have, black and white characters in a children's book. But the fact that it's 1/4 of the entire school is all like the Joker, basically. They're all like very comedically evil. Feels very unrealistic. So that's really my thoughts on the first book. Not a big fan of this one. Probably I would rank this one the worst of all of them. I think they probably progressively get better for the most part. This one, not a big fan. So now moving on to book number 2, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. This one, again, it suffers from almost all of the problems that I just mentioned in the first book. A lot of the characters get more fleshed out in this one than the previous book. One thing that is a bit annoying in this book, and is true of all the rest of the sequels of Harry Potter, is J.K. Rowling writes it so that someone just picking this up, not having read any of the previous books, can still understand it. So there's a lot of things that are like re-explained, the characters that are reintroduced, and I could see it being very annoying for people who actually want to just read through the whole series, having to constantly being given the information again. We open again with Harry at the Dursleys, as he is preparing to go back to Hogwarts, but he's warned by a house elf, which is basically the Harry Potter universe equivalent of a slave. I think the phrase house elf is kind of a take on the phrase house Nick. This one is kind of a murder mystery almost. The characters don't actually get murdered, but they get petrified, which means they kind of freeze up like stone almost. A lot of these students keep freezing up like that, and they try to figure out who is the perpetrator. There are heavy themes of racism in this book. Malfoy refers to Hermione as a mudblood, and we slowly learn that there's this kind of racist ideology in the wizarding world towards wizards that are born of muggles, muggles being non-magic people, just normal people. The wizards who are born of muggles, a lot of wizards don't like them. They call them mudbloods because they don't have pure wizard blood. I thought it was kind of an interesting way to sort of get the concept of bigotry across to children. And we learn that one of the founders, Salazar Slytherin, who created the Slytherin house, basically his whole ideology was based on this kind of racism. He didn't want the mudbloods allowed in Hogwarts. He wanted to keep only pure wizards in Hogwarts. That was his whole main contribution to Hogwarts, which again presents the Slytherin house as like comedically evil. Their founder is basically like a Hitler-esque character. And a lot of these students that are getting petrified are the mudbloods, so they think that that is the motive for these attacks. Another character that I liked in here is their new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, Gilderoy Lockhart. He's like this very full of himself, kind of pseudo-celebrity character. It was very funny. He's the most insufferable person ever. I thought a lot of his dialogue was pretty funny. But yeah, overall, I didn't really enjoy this book. I feel like it's much the same as the first one. Again, the ending is really retarded with a long monologue. This is probably one of the worst endings of the books. Yeah, the ending I felt like was really a stretch. It's like you couldn't have possibly predicted what was going to happen. Rowling basically kind of pulls out this idea from her ass that you can like create a clone of yourself inside of a diary and it can actually affect the real world. And it was very weird. I don't know. It seemed kind of thrown in there randomly at the end. I didn't really like the ending. But yeah, that's book 2. Moving on to book 3 here. We got The Prisoner of Azkaban. And yeah, this centers around a escaped prisoner of Azkaban. Azkaban is a wizarding prison that we learn about. That is, you do not want to go there. It's very horrible. There are these creatures called the Dementors that basically torment you when just the sight of them makes you relive the worst memories you've ever had. And if you spend a lot of time around these Dementors, you kind of go insane. Hogwarts has now been required to have these Dementors around the school to keep it safe from this escaped prisoner, Sirius Black. One thing I thought was funny in this book is they introduce divination class. Harry starts taking a class called divination, and divination is basically astrology and tarot card reading and seeing into the future, looking into crystal balls, all this kind of stuff. And it's funny, even in the wizarding world, astrology is like the least accurate form of magic. Their divination professor, Professor Trelawney, almost every prediction she makes is wrong. She's constantly predicting Harry to die a horrific death. And yeah, no one takes divination seriously. I thought it was very funny. One thing I appreciated about the books is Rowling comes up with some pretty, interesting ways to not have every year just feel the same. With a character going to school every year, it would be easy for all the books to kind of blend together. But she cleverly kind of makes sure new things are added every year. Harry has new classes that he takes. The third years are allowed to go to a place called Hogsmeade, which is a whole other magical village that they get to explore. Yeah, all the stuff relating to Hogsmeade was pretty fun. Harry is not allowed in Hogsmeade, but he has to sneak out every now and then to go there. I was really annoyed by the kind of ending of this book. It has the most convoluted ending of all of them. The sort of monologue that I've mentioned is present in here, but it's very annoying in this book because the characters are trying to explain things to Ron, Harry, and Hermione. Rowling intentionally makes the characters have like bad communication so that you're not really understanding what's going on for a long time. I found it very annoying. One of the big reveals at the end here is that Ron's rat, Scabbers, is actually an evil wizard named Peter. Professor Lupin, who's this professor that figures this all out, doesn't really explain it to them properly. He just keeps referring to the rat as Peter, and it's confusing the characters. They don't understand what he's talking about. And the writing just felt kind of lazy with a lot of the dialogue at the end. The character of Sirius Black, I also feel, was not very well done in this book. He's this serial killer for most of the book, and then we reveal he's actually a good guy kind of at the end, but it's not really written very well. Like, Harry instantly likes him after this reveal, but it doesn't really make sense. Like, he's still a very sketchy, weird person, and all of a sudden Harry sees him as like his dad almost at the end of the book. It didn't really feel earned. I didn't really like this one. There's kind of a cool time travel sequence at the very end, but it's only like one chapter long. Again, I just don't really like any of these original 3 books. Moving on to the final one I want to review today, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. This is a big monster of a book. The pages in these books are tiny, by the way, so it looks huge, but it's not really that long of a read. But yeah, this one was probably my favorite of the 4 that I read. Still didn't love it. I feel like with the longer length, we definitely get to flesh out the story a lot more than the previous books. There's this tournament that is going to involve other schools. We learn there are other wizarding schools around the world, and they're all going to come to Hogwarts to compete in this Triwizard tournament. It's almost like an Olympics of sorts. I thought it was pretty cool how Rowling kind of expanded this wizarding world. We learned about all these other schools and stuff. I really liked it. I liked meeting all the new characters from the different schools. So the way this tournament works is basically a champion is chosen from each of the 3 schools to compete in a series of challenges to see which school wins. And the way they choose this champion is using a magical item called the Goblet of Fire, hence the name. And basically these students all place their name in this goblet, and at the end of, I forget how long, maybe a 48-hour period, it will shoot out the names of the champions. Cedric Diggory, a character from the previous book, becomes the champion for the Hogwarts school, and then the champions of the other schools are chosen. But miraculously, a 4th name comes out of the goblet, Harry's name. This is very strange because he didn't put his name in the goblet. Also, Harry is underage. He's not even allowed to enter. So there's a bit of a mystery as to how he was able to be entered into the tournament, who put his name into the goblet. There's also a character, Rita Skeeter, in here, who was largely cut out of the movies. And she's kind of a parody of sensationalist journalism and misinformation. She's constantly writing these stories about Harry and his friends that are just not true at all. There's a lot of drama that ensues with the school turning on Harry and Hermione because of these things that Rita Skeeter is writing. I thought it was a pretty funny character. Another thing that was largely cut from the movies is a subplot about the house elves. We get even more deep into the themes of slavery in this book. We find out a lot of the things around Hogwarts are actually the result of slave labor. All the food that is cooked for them, the fact that their rooms have housekeeping and their beds are cleaned and made in the morning. This is all house elves, unpaid slaves doing all this stuff. Hermione, finding this out, is very upset by this. She thinks, we need to liberate the house elves and give them pay and allow them to be equal to the rest of the wizarding society. But no one takes her seriously. The house elves, they want to be enslaved. They actually claim they enjoy, not being paid. The character Dobby that I briefly mentioned from the second book, he was freed from being a slave at the end of the book. In this book, he is, actually wants to be paid, and the rest of the house elves are like really offended and weirded out by him, the fact that he actually wants to be paid for his labor. We actually find out that he negotiated prices with Dumbledore, and he actually negotiated to have a lower salary because of this, philosophy these house elves have, is that they don't really want to be paid a lot. It's playing with the theme of internalized racism. The mindset of the house elves is actually pretty similar to the mindset of a lot of slaves in America. A lot of slaves believed that it was a black person's place to be a slave, and that's just how, society ought to be. That's kind of what these house elves represent. It was very funny because Hermione starting this whole elf liberation front is not taken seriously at all. Everyone thinks it's just the most retarded thing. Anytime she starts talking about it, Harry, Ron, every character is just like, shut the fuck up, Hermione. They like being enslaved. You don't know what you're talking about. It was very funny. It was kind of playing on social justice movements and how people don't really take them seriously. A lot of people don't really care about, social justice movements, especially when they're the ones benefiting from the slave labor. All the characters enjoy the benefits of the slave labor, so they don't really care to free these elves. I thought it was actually a pretty funny satire and pretty deep for a children's book. I really enjoyed it. We also get a lot of backstory about the times that Voldemort was in power. After Voldemort died, after he tried to kill Harry and his killing curse rebounded onto himself, a lot of these people claimed that they were under the power of a curse called the Imperius Curse, where basically you can take control of a person and control everything they do. So there were a lot of these trials trying to determine who actually was under the effects of a curse and who actually joined Voldemort of their own volition. It was pretty interesting to see how divided the wizarding world got over this. Anyone perceived to be a Voldemort supporter, known as a Death Eater, was punished very harshly after Voldemort died. The book shows how fear can drive people to go way overboard. Barty Crouch is this character who, even sentenced his own son to a life sentence because he was associated with a few Death Eaters. We also meet a character, Moody, Professor Moody, who's the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Moody is what's called an Auror, who is basically a person that tries to find these dark wizards and send them to prison. I feel like this was probably the most compelling mystery of all the books that I read, but I feel like this book fell short again, especially with the ending. It's so over the top goofy. At the end of the Triwizard Tournament, Harry and Cedric actually tie to grabbing the final cup. You have to grab this cup at the end to win. They both grab it at the same time and find out is actually a port key, which a port key is an item that when you touch it, it will transport you somewhere. Basically functions as a portal. So Harry and Cedric are transported to the grave of Voldemort's dad, and we realize that Wormtail, one of Voldemort's servants, is bringing Voldemort back to life. We realize that Voldemort has actually hatched this master plan to have Harry win the tournament so that he would touch the cup and be transported to him in this graveyard where he's about to be resurrected. He again gives this super long monologue And it is by far the worst monologue in the whole series, because this is supposed to be the most intelligent, greatest, dark wizard of all time, and he's just basically spilling everything to Harry, things he didn't even need to go into. He reveals the names of all the Death Eaters that are there, just telling Harry everything. It makes no sense. The duel between Voldemort and Harry was so underwhelming. I always remembered these scenes from the movies where they have wand fights, where their wands kind of connect, these beams shoot out of their wands, and you just keep seeing the beams go back and forth as the characters are trying to get each other. I've always seen those scenes, and I wonder, how did they make that interesting in the book? And the answer is they didn't. They basically say, oh, there was a large orb in the middle of their wands, and the orb moved closer to Voldemort, and then the orb moved backwards, and their wands were vibrating really hard. It's the most boring, excruciating thing I've ever read. It's not enjoyable at all. And the fact that a 14-year-old boy is already more powerful than, the most powerful dark wizard of all time just makes me feel like there's no stakes to this story whatsoever. Voldemort did not live up to this hype that was given to him in the previous 3 books. Then Harry just escapes in 2 seconds by grabbing the cup again. He just runs away and grabs the cup again. And for some reason, the Portkey takes him back to where he was before. It takes him back to the 3rd task, which is weird because that's not how any of the Portkeys functioned before this one. We find out about Portkeys in the beginning of this book, and the way Portkeys work is you touch it, you teleport, and then the Portkey is broken. It doesn't work anymore. It just becomes a normal object. That's how it's explained in the beginning of the book. But for some reason, at the end of the book, he's able to be teleported and then teleport back, which especially doesn't make any sense. Why would Voldemort want the Portkey to work that way? It would allow Harry to escape. So yeah, there's a big plot hole at the end there. And yeah, it's just really, really fucking stupid that he was able to escape Voldemort. And one monologue was not enough. We have to get another monologue from this person at Hogwarts that was working for Voldemort, and we realized at the end that they were actually a kind of spy this whole time. It was dumb. I don't know. I really didn't like the ending of the book. Really dumb and gay. But yeah, those are my feelings on the first 4 Potter books. I'm not the biggest Potterhead fan. We'll see what happens with these final 3 books. I'm still going to finish the series. But yeah, not really a big fan so far. And yeah,